Did you know that people in antiquity would cosplay their dead relatives? Hi, everybody. My name is Robyn Walsh. I'm a scholar of New Testament and early Christianity and part of Paths in Biblical Studies. Obviously, this is a different topic than I normally do. I'm doing it because Halloween is almost upon us, and it's one of the creepier things that I know about antiquity, but I'm going to relate it to actually early Christianity and relics and martyrs. So bear with me. There's a great book. It's hard to know where to start. There's a great book by a scholar named Harriet Flower, where she describes that in antiquity, so remember in Roman antiquity, Greek and Roman antiquity, you didn't have photography. You didn't even have things like life masks or death masks that you may have seen actually. And Princeton has an interesting collection of them. But you sometimes see these at museums. They used to be these plaster casts that were done of somebody's face, again, usually in life. Sometimes you would do them on somebody's deathbed, usually, again, of the face. You can see some of Abraham Lincoln that are out there, some of Benjamin Franklin. So these famous figures where you would only have portraits painted of them, right? I mean, Abraham Lincoln, there was photography, but they nonetheless continued to do a life mask of him during his lifetime. But sometimes you would also see, for example, if you had somebody like a famous pianist, so I'm thinking here about Chopin, they actually would make plaster casts of his hands, right? Because that's what he was famous for. So this was a very persistent and reliable kind of practice that took place, really, again, all the way back to the ancient Mediterranean. Now, in ancient Rome, elites would sometimes have a wax mask of their relatives made and keep those masks in a sort of like a curio cabinet by their door in their ancient homes. So imagine you would come to somebody's house, like go into the atrium of their home, and you would see kind of like a glass pantry of all of their dead relatives. A little bit creepy, right? Now, because these masks were made back then of wax, we don't have that many of them. In fact, I'm only aware of one that still exists in Naples, in the Museum of Naples. But these masks, according to Flower, and definitely go check out her book on this subject, these masks would be taken out and worn by members of the community to celebrate different kinds of familial events or maybe communal events in the local jurisdiction when they would take place and be significant for remembering one's ancestors. So, in other words, you would take down a mask of somebody, presumably, an ancestor who had passed. You would try to find somebody in the town that was basically the same like height and weight as your deceased relative and have them put on this wax mask of your departed family member to like join the birthday party. So again, a little Halloweeny, a little creepy, but a way to make a connection to the deceased. Now, there are other ways to make connections to the deceased in the ancient world. I have to say, these masks and the way that they're described make me think of all of the ghost stories that we have from antiquity, particularly things like paradoxography in the Greek novel, where there are stories of, amorous ghosts. So especially like young women who were never married, who have died, who might like come back and shack up with a attractive friend of the family who's come visiting. There's more than one story like that from the ancient world. So I don't know, maybe she was just wearing a wax mask. I'm kidding. But it makes you kind of think about not necessarily resurrection in a different light per se, but the idea that you could put on these masks of these deceased characters and sort of reappear is interesting. Now, let me relate this to relics. And the reason I want to do this is that I'm actually giving a talk for the Biblical Studies Academy on Tuesday, October 28th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern. We've titled it Ghosts and Ghouls, Relics and Remains. So I'm going to be talking about some of these creepy stories and giving you some examples, but then relating it to the idea of saints' relics and martyrdom in early Christianity. And one of my favorite examples, actually, of how we see relics function in early Christianity is from the catacomb of Priscilla. There's something there called the Greek chapel. And if you looked in the chapel at the main apse, you're going to see a hole that's called a confessio in the wall. And it's pretty clear that there had at one point been a sarcophagus in that apse, probably of a saint or some martyr. And people were able to circumambulate behind that structure to reach their hand in and touch the relics of the saint. If anybody's ever been to Rome, you've probably seen different body parts to consecrate different churches or other kinds of relics from departed saints on display in those churches. Now, what's interesting about these relics is they are sort of a mediating object in the sense that even though they're part of the mortal form of the individual who has passed, it was understood that if you were a martyr, if you were a saint, that you weren't going to wait in purgatory for the second coming or for the rapture. You're going to go straight up. So the theology around this is that anybody who is executed in the same manner by the state that Jesus was executed for their faith wouldn't have to wait for their ascension. And so that those individuals are already up in heaven and they can act as a mediating force for anybody who prays to them. So anyone familiar with Catholic theology will see that this has been, again, a persistent kind of perspective. And it's more complicated than that, but that gives you kind of a quick sketch. The relics themselves, too, become these objects that are sort of, let's say, supercharged. They're understood because that individual had this exalted status, that there's a possibility that a relic associated with them, whether it's a bodily relic or some other kind of object associated with their life or their death, could also have some special properties, could have some sort of spiritual power that could confer something like healing or a material change in an individual who both prays or touches those objects. And then if you think about Jesus's actions in the Gospels, how often he touches an individual whom he heals, you could understand how this physiological connection was very potent in antiquity. But again, I'm going to be doing a talk on this. My talk is on Tuesday, October 28th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And we'll get more into the subject, but I wanted to give you a quick Halloweeny sketch. So I hope to see you there. Go to bartairman.com/BSA learning to RSVP. It's a little creepy.